Hi, welcome to EMDR with Alice. Today we're going to talk about how the role of the EMDR therapist is to help change the relationship that the client has with their trauma or with disturbance. And so to talk about this, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about how when we have trauma or grief, we have these experiences that happen inside of us in our emotions, sometimes in our body, and the natural response is to avoid that. And sometimes, depending on the experience we had or the age in which we had the experience, those emotions and the sensations and things that we've had in the body can be very overwhelming. And so from an EMDR standpoint, the way that it's stored then in those maladaptive networks is stored with overwhelm, feeling like it's way too big, we can't manage it, and fear to be with it, right? And so all of that gets stored together, and it can create what I've heard referred to as an internal phobic response. And so an internal phobic response is just this inability to be with whatever that distress or disturbance is in the body because it feels so overwhelming. So there develops this fear of being with it. And so one of the most important pieces when we're doing trauma work is beginning to help clients understand and learn the tools of how to be present with. I think one of the most brilliant things about EMDR therapy and Francine Shapiro is essentially this tool of teaching people to be present with disturbance. And it's fascinating that when people can be present with disturbance and stay present with it and stay in their window of tolerance, the shift happens. That's what the organic process of reprocessing seems to take place. And so it's not necessarily, there's lots of different mechanisms in EMDR that make it successful. But I feel like one of the key components that I have witnessed and that I've seen over the, 15 plus years that I've done EMDR therapy is essentially giving clients the tools and the confidence to be present with distress or present with disturbance. So there's a couple things we do in prep. Those tools that we give them that help change their state, that help them recognize that they can be present with distress. I also, when I'm picking up pretty quickly or early on in the treatment process that I'm working with a client that is really overwhelmed by their internal experience, I begin teaching them titration of how to be present with it just in little increments. The pendulation exercise by Peter Levine is a fantastic way of teaching that and that titration process. And it begins to build this experience now, a new adaptive network for the client that they can be with distress and be okay, and that they can move away from it and back towards it. And they can increase their time with that distress a little bit at a time. Now, fast forward to in reprocessing. One of our big goals as an EMDR therapist is we're always watching for, is a client in their window of tolerance? Are they present, staying present with the distress? And so a couple of ways to think about being able to do that is offering this therapeutic container in the reprocessing experience is using your cognitive interweaves. And sometimes the cognitive interweaves are those questions or statements that we talk about, but sometimes the cognitive interweave is just the therapist, kind of calming, soothing voice that is there present with them while they're in the distress. And so I'll give you an example of that. If I'm working with a client who all of a sudden is having either a somatic experience or a big emotional response, and I'm also seeing them at the same time, fear is attached to that, right? So they start to feel panicky with that experience, or they feel like there's a big resistance to kind of being with that distress. Then one of the things I began to do is actually talk with them while I'm doing the bilateral, saying things like, yeah, that's right. Just observe it. Just notice it. Just be curious about it. Observe if it gets bigger or worse. Just noticing. You're doing a great job. Just being with it. And so I'm just offering these really calm, soothing cognitive interweaves as I'm doing the bilateral. And while I'm doing that, I'm retraining the brain of what it feels like, that it's possible, right, to be present with this distressful experience and stay present with it. And it's like they're learning. It shifts the perspective. Oh, I can be with this uncomfortable feeling. I can be with this uncomfortable emotion, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And so it's creating this new relationship then with the distress, this new relationship with sadness, a new relationship with anxiety, a new relationship with the fear even, when we can kind of hold with confidence just this invitation to be present with it and stay with it as long as they can. And then if we notice that it's getting to be too much, then as a therapist, I might just gently bring them away from that for just a moment, just to give relief. And that could look like stopping and pausing. What are you noticing now? If it seems like they're having a hard time, I might do an orientation. Let's just take a moment and just orient ourselves back to the present where we are. And then when it feels like they're present, now when you're ready, we're just going to go back into it and bring up the memory. Notice what you're noticing now and follow my fingers. And then we just go back in. And then I might do shorter sets for a little bit and see if that's what they need. But again, I might be talking to them a little bit more. Someone who's really struggling being with that distress, I might talk a little bit more. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm just offering this calming, soothing voice that helps them stay present. So it's another dual attention and really encourages that present moment awareness. So it might be things like, yeah, that's old stuff. Just notice how it's here, just observing it, just looking at it like you're looking out that window at scenery going by. So I may be saying that as I'm doing the bilateral, just to help them be present with it, because that's a big part of our job as EMDR therapists, is coming up with ways to help clients be present with it. We don't want to get in the trap of joining them in trying to get away from it, right? And so I want to help invite them to be with it. And then if they can't, if in that invitation I'm seeing it's just too much, then my job as an EMDR therapist is to help provide tools and help strengthen those tools and those skills so that they can, right? And so then I might be doing some more assessment. We may have to back up and go back to phases 1 and 2 and do some more assessment and developing some more tools before we come back into it. So again, remembering a big job of the EMDR therapist is to help clients learn the tools and then be present with disturbance and distress. So we begin to change the relationship that they have with it. And then the natural, organic way that the brain processes trauma can take over when they're able to be present with it and stay present with it. That's all for today. Thank you for joining.